We've worked with ABB now on the World EV Day side for a number of years, but I'm delighted to welcome ABB to their first EV summit. A note on also welcoming Toddington Harper, who's going to be joining us on the panel. Toddington in 2018 made the announcement of the first electric forecourt here at the EV Summit. So again, we've been part of the journey of delivering on major EV charging infrastructure initiatives. Existing infrastructure is all around us, and utilising this is essential to increasing adoption and accessibility. But also, how do we ensure that we make the right decisions now in preparation for the next generation of EV drivers? To answer those questions, I'm delighted to join us on the panel Oliver Johnson, the e-mobility lead at ABB, Toddington Harper, the CEO of GRIDSERVE, and Tom Masters, senior electrical engineer for Calfordseaden. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And thank you very much indeed for allowing me to have a seat. To start with, I'd just like to first hand over to Oliver from ABB, and thank you for sponsoring this panel. Oliver, would you like to just say some words on ABB's involvement in the sector?
Sure. So thank you, Aid. We've been involved in the e-mobility sector probably for 12 years now as an initial startup out of Delft University in the Netherlands, and then subsequently we've grown to a business which is now approximately 1,400 people, covering roughly 88 countries around the world where we sell our products, and very much at the forefront of developing EV charging products, all the way from commercial chargers for on the highway, as it were, and then all the way through to home products. And that's we continue to grow and develop our business.
I spoke to you briefly earlier. I understand that you have some exciting news for us, so just a few moments to tell us where you are in your journey over at GRIDSERVE, please.
Great. Thanks, Aid, for welcoming me back. And hi, everybody. So GRIDSERVE, as I imagine a number of you know, are on a mission to deliver sustainable energy on the scale needed to move the needle on climate change. The odds are against us. According to the IPCC, we need to peak global emissions by 2025 at the latest to have a chance of maintaining 1.5 degrees of warming. And so with that backdrop, we're going as quickly as we possibly can. We're producing clean energy, principally with solar farms. We're distributing that energy into electric vehicles. So we announced at this summit, as you said a number of years ago, the first electric forecourt. We showed a video and many people said, "You're never going to build that." Well, we did build it. We built another one at Norwich, and of course we took over the network from Ecotricity. So we are now, I guess the big bit of news from us is we've now charged over 1 million vehicles this year, which we're really quite proud of. We're putting 10 million EV miles into electric vehicles every single month, where we are now. And that comes across a number of different areas. Electric forecourts, as anyone who knows who's been to one, deliver an absolutely phenomenal charging experience, but the whole environment is just designed around it. That's great for principally locations. On the motorway network, we're fast and furiously trying to deliver what we call electric super hubs, so minimum of 6 to 12 or more, 350 kilowatt chargers in as many places as we possibly can. And again, those are delivering great results. And I guess the bit which kind of ties well into this session is the other large number of chargers we have, which are the medium power chargers, which are we replace the existing chargers and we put new ones in their place, and that's typically 2 chargers per location, and those are fed from the grid supply of the existing building, and that's where it's really quite challenging because you've got limited grid supply. The facilities weren't designed around that. And these chargers are being used, incredibly extensively, probably the highest utilization, I'd say, of any network, probably anywhere in the world. And as Oliver knows, they're really putting the chargers through their paces. And so, we're on a mission to both, increase the amount of power we can provide for those, and that's challenging. There's lots of things that we're doing that we're working on that. But more importantly, I think everybody realizes 1 or 2 chargers at motorway sites just isn't going to do it. So we're putting as many as we possibly can, as quickly as we can. And as I said, every single new super hub that we open is pretty much full from the moment we've done it. And so, watch this space. There's an awful lot more coming next year.
In short, I think it's fair to say you're one of the real pioneers of the EV charging sector. So absolutely delighted to have you on the stage here at the EV Summit. Thanks very much indeed, Toddington. Also joined by Sue Riddlestone now, who heads up Bioregional. For those of you who don't know, Bioregional are one of the most amazing sustainability organisations in the UK, and I strongly urge you to take a look at their work. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Sue just got off the train, so joined us a little bit late, but just in the nick of time. Tom, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your work, please, as well?
So I work for a company called Calfordseaden, and essentially we're building services consultants. So everything to unlock the EVC and the charging world for cars, we'll be involved a lot earlier on in the design stages for projects and developments. So it's really crucial that we get on board as early as possible to look at the maximum demand for the building. Not only to save the developer money, but it's also looking at how we can utilise the electricity throughout the building itself, particularly looking into electrical vehicle charging. It's more so, do we want another substation? Do we need another substation? Can the existing infrastructure support what we're trying to do? So it's really crucial we get on board early on to enable us to make these decisions. So looking into also the regulations that are driving, the driving force for us is approved document S, which is the infrastructure of EVCs, which was published, and it's mandatory from June this year, early this year. So we're working along with that and other regulations to ensure that we're providing the ambition that the government need to meet in 2030.
Very good, thanks very much indeed. So Sue, you're all about providing ambition in environmental change. Tell us a little bit more about your work, please.
So Bioregional, we're a not-for-profit sustainability consultancy, been going for nearly 30 years. Some of the original zero-carbon sustainable developments where we had, 20 years ago we had enough charging points for everybody, but of course now they're all out of date. And we work particularly on creating zero-carbon communities where it makes it easy for people to live a sustainable lifestyle, thinking about it in the most holistic way. And obviously, it's all about making the buildings energy efficient, but transport is an equal and rising amount of our carbon emissions, so it's really important that we tackle that. We also work with a lot of companies on sustainable products, so obviously there's a lot of embodied energy and impact in an electric vehicle, in the infrastructure, and we need to think about that as well. So it's all about modal shift, and EVs are an important part of it, and I'm the proud owner of an e-bike. So don't forget about the e-bikes, because they do a bit on keeping you fit and sociable as well. So it's not just cars, it's bikes too.
Absolutely. Thanks very much indeed, Sue. So getting into the heart of the discussion then. So Oliver, if I could ask you first. Oliver, why do we need an EV charging infrastructure installation in our homes and commercial buildings? Is the current public EV charging network not sufficient? Why do we need this extra capacity?
I'm sure, Aid. So again, when you're looking at most EV users, most of the energy that you need to leave your house in the morning with enough energy to get where you're going to get, like I did this morning, some good earthly hour with a heater on in the car. It's important you have that availability in your local environment to possibly charge your car overnight. When you're not using the car, it's convenient to charge the car. So that's is the most important place to charge. And again, we've talked about that earlier on. We heard on some of the other panels, 4/5 of charging is taking place at home, as it were, in the situations where you can. It doesn't detract from the fact that I'll let Toddington fill in the next bit, but if you haven't got those facilities local, then you need other rapid charging facility or other facilities around there. But at home is sort of a very important part of where you need to charge your vehicles.
Toddington, I know you're working at breakneck speed to deliver public charging, but why still the need for domestic charging?
I mean, we need, again, if you come back to, what we're trying to achieve, deliver sustainable energy and move the needle on climate change and the timeframes we have available to try and do this with, we need to do everything we can. And the real challenge about domestic, if you can, it's fantastic. If you can, it would be great to also put solar on your roof. You can produce, for an average size solar installation on a domestic rooftop, 10,000 plus miles of EV charging a year from your roof. Isn't that amazing? But of course, 40% of homes, roughly speaking, we understand you don't have the ability to charge at home. And if you look at the grid challenges that would enable those people to charge at home, it's certainly a lot more than an additional 10%. So we don't know the number, but without a great deal of additional huge investment in a very short period of time, I think it's probably reasonable to say around 50% of people won't easily be able to charge at home. And that's clearly an enormous problem. And when if it's incredibly cold today, and so it's important that in homes you also have heating. We also need to get to net zero or even zero better for heating too, so you need heat pumps, and there just isn't enough capacity on the low voltage network to either get all the houses to be running on to have EV chargers or heat pumps, let alone the combination of the two. So we need a combination of solutions. We need them as quickly as we can. If you can put one on your home, put it on your home, but it's a good idea to bolster it with solar power, batteries, and some smart tech as well. And if you can't, then you need a combination of solutions outside of your home. So we've heard a number of people earlier talk about different options, from lamppost charging, if you happen to be lucky enough to have that near. But where we're coming from is really high power, really reliable charging hubs that will enable anybody to have the confidence whether they can charge at home or not. And of course, if you're on a very busy journey, or if you're a fleet vehicle, a fleet user, and you can't easily charge the vehicle at home, and there's different types of vehicles too, there's larger vehicles as well, which we're also working on, then you just need to have really robust charging infrastructure. So I mentioned what we've done in a pretty short amount of time, which it's pretty incredible progress, but it's nowhere near enough. I think we all understand that. We need so much more, and this is not an either-or situation, it's both and, times a million.
I think we're witnessing an interesting moment where the narrative around speed in the automotive sector is transitioning away from cars to the need to decarbonise. We've heard that from Jonathan at Polestar, now from Tim at Ford. You're talking about the need for speed in the shift for decarbonising charging. It's an interesting narrative transition.
It really is essential. And just back to that point of, so let's say, we can't question the IPCC, the world's leading scientists. And if they've told us we have until 2025, that's less than 1,000 days at the latest, to avoid temperature rises increasing 1.5 degrees of warming, then it's up to us, like now, literally nobody's, future generations will judge how we acted when we knew the science. And so it's just absolutely essential that we all get our skates on, and we don't aim for a target that doesn't achieve the desired result. We actually aim for a target to knock this out of the park. Surely that's the responsibility that we need to collectively be doing now.
Absolutely. Sue, could I just ask for your contribution to that question, please?
On the current infrastructure, we definitely need to improve it, and when we're working on new build developments with partners, we are looking to offer charging to all new homes, and when we're working with local authorities on their net zero carbon spatial planning strategies, we're recommending that they need to look into how they're going to retrofit the charging infrastructure to the existing homes. And there's no doubt, as you say, that it's absolutely essential and it's a massive challenge. So fantastic to have this conference where we're all getting our heads together on how to get on with it, because it's amazing what we can all achieve if we just all pull together on this one. And it is one that the government seems to be behind. So that's a great start.
We'll come on to the government mandate piece in a second, but before we do, Tom, you're an engineer, an electrical engineer. What's your take on this subject?
Well, we're meant to call ourselves building services engineers now, so more rounded. Excuse me, just touching on the other regulations and parts L, O, F and S, which is the EVCs. So it's not only looking at the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure, but it's also looking at the overheating for buildings, and it's also looking at additional ventilation and decarbonisation of the grid. All this builds into one picture for my role and our duties for our clients. We've got to essentially look at how much of infrastructure is required. Now, when you're looking at domestic uses, it's slightly different to what we do in terms of when we're looking at a residential building which has got 400 apartments. We need to look at how, is it possible to provide a car charger for each dwelling, or how do we look at it? So Part S lists out items in there to say there's a cost gap on there. So if you do exceed that, you'll then look at, if it's 7% over the total cost, do we put infrastructure in so we've got it ready for the next phase? So it's really looking into that, but the infrastructure will be ready. But like I say, these steps at the moment, so publicising the Part S, it outdates what was previously issued by the government in London to say that we must provide 20 passive and 20 active chargers. That's now superseded by Part S, which is growing to meet the ambition which we're trying to set out for the 2030 removal of combustion engines.
Very good, thanks so much. So to move on to that government mandate piece then, so is it right for governments to mandate on the installation of EV chargers at homes and commercial buildings? Oliver, can I hand that one to you first, please?
Yeah, mandating anything is always obviously a slightly tricky subject. I think it's a step in the right direction because I think it's an enablement factor that sometimes people might not want to take on their own. And having gone through the process of having your own EV charger put in your own house, sometimes it can be a painful process. And I think a lot of the research suggests that it makes houses more attractive to potential purchasers. And so I think then it's another enablement thing. And then moving on to obviously what Toddington said, whatever we can do to encourage this adoption is a very positive thing. So I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Toddington, can I hand that one to you?
Yeah, I think it's extremely positive. I think the great role for government is to set the North Star. And that's what's happened with the Climate Change Act, which has then forced, think about how do you actually deliver that, which is then forcing that, you're not going to be able to buy new petrol and diesel cars by 2030 and so on and so forth. And what that does is it allows industry to kind of gear up and raise the money because it takes the risk out of, is this ever going to happen? And so, putting more and more regulation around ensuring that it does happen earlier and people have more chargers and more confidence around this is all a good thing.
Mm. Very good. Sue?
I think in this country, the government seems to be wanting to let 1,000 flowers grow and see what happens. And I think if you think about recycling services as an analogy, where it's always a bit different everywhere, it makes it a bit more of a thought process for people. So whatever the sector can do to respond to this government mandate by making it as easy as possible for people, that things are quite similar, for people to use, that the same language is used, I feel is very important to really help the sector grow and take off. But my own experience is that it seems pretty easy and straightforward at the moment. I've used a few different types of EV chargers, and even if they are different, it seems quite easy. So I think the sector's doing a good job. And I think the government just needs to make sure it doesn't get in the way, and the sector needs to have that conversation with government whenever anything gets in the way, get straight in there. And there are advocacy groups that we're a part of, like the Aldersgate group, who are in and out of government all day long and have these relationships with ministers. So making sure that ministers know if there's anything standing in the way for the sector, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, about the rock face of things as an electrical engineer, what's your take on this government mandating question?
I think it's a brilliant idea. I think what they're doing is they're not forcing our hand, but they're saying in 2030 there's going to be drastic change in our industry. So we're getting on board now. And for me, being able to do the design process at early stages lets me understand how much energy we need and how much energy we need to use. And also what comes into it for our side is the innovation behind it. How are we going to survive on less power for this particular project, for example? So we're looking at vehicle to home charging or vehicle to grid to mitigate any short-term overloading. So there's things in the pipeline that we're looking into, but for now we know that it's not mandated to say 100% chargers everywhere. There must be we're doing step by step, which allows us for the innovation to grow as we design. And I think that's really helpful in terms of our position in the market and how we design and give the developers what they want.
Where do you see that vehicle-to-home technology coming online? What sort of time frame do you see for that?
So at the minute, there are firms looking into it. I think it almost needs a collaborative effect in terms of not just the designers, its manufacturers, its developers, all looking into it and sharing their thoughts and experiences to see how we can make this better and how we can get this product to the market. So the likes of UKPN and people like that will be looking into it to see we're going to have short-term overloading from 4 till 6 o'clock in the morning in London. Can we use that energy that we've given to these batteries in the cars? Can we use that energy, harness it to make sure there's no overloading? So I think it's part and parcel of the manufacturers as well as the designers and others collaborating to ensure that the end result's delivered.
Oliver, coming to you, if I may. What challenges need to be overcome in the installation of EV chargers in homes and commercial buildings?
Sure. So for generally, it's the amount of electricity that's obviously available to get that piece of equipment working, and obviously our learning engineers obviously better versed at all of that. But that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have right across the networks is connectivity to the grid, and it's very much applicable on the high power charging. We've been doing considerable work with some of the DNOs, as in the electrical distribution companies, to look at better ways of modelling the loads and the harmonics that get put on those loads. And that's to really try and help them not put massive bills in the way of getting the job done. And there's a lot of that happens in the background to try and get those guys educated to accept the equipment onto their networks at a lower cost for the grid that way. So I think that's one of the major points.
Very good. So the clue's in the name with your company name, Toddington GRIDSERVE. You're intimately connected with this subject area. What's your take on that question?
Yeah, so I think the really important thing, one of the really important things is to fully understand and think differently about power and energy. So, power gives you a capacity problem. There's only so much power you can use, but it's actually energy that drives your vehicle. So 1 kilowatt hour will drive a vehicle for 4 miles typically. And the same with renewable energy. If you can, the solar system that I've just put on my home, I put a DC coupled solar system on rather than an AC coupled. So you can store energy for later without converting it into AC. And so it's really important that we don't overload the AC network. And one of the good ways of doing that is to kind of look at DC coupled technologies as well. And really looking at how we can balance the two together. And actually kind of beyond the home as well, something that we've learned. So we're building what we call sun to wheel. So generating energy in solar, in large solar farms typically, but also on homes. Distributing it through charges and accelerating the uptake of electric vehicles as well. And one thing that we've noticed is that on the public charging network, there's almost a perfect match between solar generation and consumption. And if we're going to balance the grid, and rightly speaking, GRIDSERVE, we think about that as a lot. A lot of time people are kind of like beating, this DNO or that DNO, and why can't I have a good capacity and so on. But the reality is that the grid was not designed for what we're using it today. It's almost the opposite. So it was designed for a small number of very large power stations, which were very wasteful, but they produced energy constantly, they were centrally controlled, it distributed, the energy was just put onto the transmission network and then distributed. And it was fairly straightforward. And now we have pretty much the opposite. So we have a very large number of intermittent power stations that are decentralized in their control. They're producing, they're generating and distributing energy all over the place on the transmission network and distribution network. And surprise, surprise, the DNOs have to regulate voltage. If they didn't regulate voltage, then we're going to have power problems. And it's really, really important. And why we're GRIDSERVE is we think that if we're going to get to where we need to get to, we have to be part of the solutions. We need to serve the grid. We need to understand what the challenges are. And a big part of the clue in that is understanding the difference between power and energy. We need to provide solutions that can actually physically get us there, that can enable the grid to function, and really sensibly think through how we distribute and generate energy accordingly. And if we do that really, really well, then we increase the odds of us getting there as quickly as possible.
So I'll hand over to you, then I'll hand over to the audience for questions to this super insightful panel. But Sue, just a quick contribution from you before I do, please.
Build on what Todd's saying, though, that where we've been working on decentralised energy networks, there's a real need for sort of peer-to-peer energy sharing. And that whole sort of backlog thing of trying to deal with the DNO, we're working on Bicester Ecotown just up the road. And it took 2 years to held the whole project up waiting for them to agree to what we needed. Even though we've got big PV on the roofs and I think with things, the increasing use of air source heat pumps, there's an increasing demand for electricity and increasing opportunities to get PV and decentralised energy networks. And we've been in conversations with Ofgem, and it's a very grey area about whether you can sort of basically sell PV to your neighbour. But that's what we need, because what's the point in sort of sending it all into the grid and bringing it all back out again? We need to be able to work the grid in a different way now, and it's sort of an emerging thing that's happening. So it'd be great to link up with all of you, I think, to sort of problem solve our way through this as quick as we can.
Very good, thanks very much indeed. So open to questions from the audience now then. So there's a roving mic. Who has the first question for our panel, please?
Hi, I'm Emmanuel. I actually live in Bicester's Ecotown. And my question is, you've talked a lot about the infrastructure, the energy grid, etc. But inside the homes, how can you make sure that going forward there's a platform and that you can sort of hack the construction industry so that they start adopting this? Because in a place like the Ecotown, for example, we've got all the elements. We have solar PVs, we have EV chargers, etc. But actually, we're completely unable to connect them and make them smart because of issues with the design of the houses, which are still from another age.
It's definitely a fast-moving situation, and we've got the first 400 homes built, and the first homes were built several years ago, so I think there's an opportunity going forward. We've got smart meters and what we call the shimmy in there, but there's definitely a need for better technology, which has come forward since they were designed and built. And maybe that's something, as a building services engineer, you could tell us what's the latest.
Well, absolutely. So looking into things like that, it's a growing problem, isn't it? So we've got an issue that which we know we need to address. So it's now capturing that into our designs. We can look at the integration of, obviously everyone's got a smart meter in this room, I'd like to think so. So that tells us simply how much energy we're using. So can we make it smarter? Can we look at how much energy is my EV using? And when does my air source heat pump come on and how much is that using? And then let's look at a cheaper tariff to say, can you charge my car between the hours of 10 and 12 o'clock when it's low carbon energy? And then also, looking into the future, it's going back to what I said before, utilising potentially a battery to store that cheap energy and use at high cost, because energy costs are rising rapidly, aren't they? So that's something that we're going to start looking into our design work.
Can you talk to us? I can't even see you. All I can see is big lights. Can you come and find us afterwards? I can see a sort of project coming on.
Yes.
Very good.
Batteries really we think, can provide a really huge part of the solution. And the cost of batteries has dropped enormously in the last kind of 10 years in particular. And it's really batteries that allow you to differentiate between energy and power, using free capacity when there is capacity to charge batteries, and on the back of that, providing power. So as an example, we've just got a site live in Cornwall. We only had 100 kilowatts of grid power. So we put in a 1 megawatt battery, and we charge that 1 megawatt hour battery when we've got available capacity. We also put a 60 kilowatt solar array on, and we're looking to do more there as well. And we connect the chargers to the back of the battery. So we've got now a megawatt of charging power off a 100 kilowatt grid connection. It's complicated because you then need some technology and controls to manage that. But really, batteries, I think, are at the very centre of it, which is actually why in the middle of the GRIDSERVE logo, you see the symbol for a battery, because we think that really is at the heart of it.
Think about the embodied impact and the environmental impact of all the mining, for all the elements that are needed in batteries and all of that infrastructure. So it's just balancing that out to be as efficient as possible.
It definitely does, but there's also some really amazing stuff going on in terms of battery recycling.
Yeah.
So, there's an incredible company, Redwood Materials, the co-founder of Tesla, created it, and they're basically setting up programs to, take all forms of lithium-ion batteries and, put them through the mix, and not just come out all the materials that are recycled, but the actual components themselves to be shipped to new factories to make new lithium-ion batteries as well. So there's an awful lot of really clever stuff going, and for sure, it's very important that we do, but it's also very important that we keep recycling and reusing as well.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question. We've got 2 more minutes to go. The man in the cowboy hat down at the front.
Look, I need to ask a question quickly. The horse is outside. Do you think we'll ever see an egalitarian approach to energy, whereby, for example, people that are lucky enough to have houses with big roofs, etc., can work with communities and housing that hasn't got a big roof, where they can benefit from solar energy, as you've alluded to? And I think there is an Australian company whose name escapes me for the moment that they're already doing this. It's sort of democratising energy. But do you not think we need to see something like that? Because at the moment, take the electric vehicle arena, it still is the domain of the privileged few. And I think we need to see more democratisation of these things to get real engagement and real traction at scale. So do you envisage any of that happening sort of in that direction?
Very quickly around the panel, because we are short on time. But
We're piloting projects like that in this decentralised energy model. But of course, whoever pays for the PV kind of wants their return, but the price is coming down a lot. But yes, we're experimenting with that at the moment, and that's where we came up against the off-gem fuzziness of the rules.
Ripple Energy is doing some pretty amazing stuff that allows you to connect people directly with renewable sources. I don't think that's quite gone to roofs yet, but I have no doubt it's coming. Not necessarily from them, but for sure.
Oliver, quickly from you.
Yeah, again, the technologies are key to all of these things. So if you can have your roof space or whatever thing you've got, and whether it's actually a given that you have to have it, then I don't think that's such a bad thing, because I think we've got to do something radical. So again, we have to do radical things to get there. So I'd have no issue with that at all.
Tom, a quick radical thing from you, please.
I think it's, like you say, you take a block of flats or an existing block of flats, you put PV on the roof. Who's entitled to that? Why don't the landlords have the energy, distribute it to people when they need it at lower tariffs? I think that's really fundamental, because there's a lot of existing residential buildings that don't really have any renewable technology. So let's put PV on it. Let's help lower the cost for people who need it when they're working from home or whatever. Let's use it that way first, and let's see what demand we have from that.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks very much indeed to Sue, Tom, Toddington and Oliver for a super insightful panel. Thanks very much indeed for those great questions. We will break now for one of these all-important pre-arranged managed meetings, sessions of 45 minutes. Then we'll return this afternoon for the final panel of the first day of the EV Summit, the Geotab panel, data, fleet experiences and the road towards profitable sustainability. So thank you very much indeed to our panel, and we look forward to seeing you again shortly.